Hey, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Processing Blue podcast. I am Mike Kaye, your Panthers beat reporter, and your other Panthers beat reporter, Alex Zietlow, is right next to me. If you're watching online on video form, he is to my right. If you're listening to this, you don't care what direction we're in, but we're still
All you can care is that you can hear it.
But we are still trying to figure out what direction the Panthers are going in after they fell to the Cincinnati Bengals 34-24 on Sunday. Alex, how are you?
I'm fantastic. If you're not going to volunteer this, I will. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one among our prognosticators at the Charlotte Observer who have yet to not choose the incorrect result of a Panthers game so far this year. Mike, is that correct? Zach, you can chime in too in case we need a fact check on that.
Yeah, Alex Zietlow is basically the Kansas City Chiefs of predicting games that the rest of the country doesn't care about. So Alex is 4-0. Blessed be he. Scott Fowler and I, who are known for our opinions, are 1-3, similar to the Carolina Panthers. So art imitates life in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, also I predicted a 10-point loss as well, and it ended up being I predicted 31-21, and it ended up being 34-24. So I did miss the mark on that point, but I'm still proud of the rest of the result. But the game didn't go exactly as I was, although the score ended up being close. I mean, the Panthers, this is a very easy thing to say from the press box and after like thinking about this game a lot, but it was really there for the taking in a lot of ways. It's so hard to come back after a first drive that ended on the 1 yard line. It is so hard to come back from an early turnover that turned into points. It's hard to come back from a couple of key drops late in the second half. And they still made it a game, and there was still a lot of belief. And I think that's the ultimate takeaway from the game. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. But the game didn't go exactly as I was expecting, even though the score still reflected what I predicted, if that makes sense.
So you were right, but you were also wrong. That happens. It's something I'm getting used to as well. But, let's get into the game because you and I disagreed on a couple of things in the press box. Let's talk about that first drive because I got asked about it a lot. Analytically, it made sense to me to go for it on 4th and 1 from the goal line, mainly because early on in the game, 3 points gives you very little. It doesn't give you the same momentum boost. It doesn't provide the same, swing in how you control things. Also, by the way, if you're kicking off right after that chip shot field goal, you're giving the Bengals better field position to start off their own drive. If you go for it on 4th and 1 and you don't get it, guess what? They have to go the length of the field. So either way, you're creating an issue for the opponent. A touchdown there would have probably helped them later on in the game as far as, keeping the distance. We saw that they struggled once the game kind of got into double-digit difference. And I was fine with it. My issue was doing 2 straight run plays that felt like a tight end target. One of those 2 plays, Tommy Tremble's been excellent in the red zone. You've got Xavier Legette for a reason. I understand that the running game is basically the bread and butter of this team right now. But what was your issue with going for it on 4th and 1?
Yeah, Mike, no, it was so funny when 4th and 1 came up. We immediately said our opinions to each other because we're sitting right next to each other in the press box and we're gabbing all game. And Mike just goes, "Got to go for it." And like immediately I say, "Nope, you kick the field goal." And I say that for a variety of reasons. One, that's just kind of how I've always watched football. I always think if you have a really positive first drive, you need to be rewarded for it. That goes back to my days of watching Notre Dame football, and I don't even remember the game, but at the end of the first drive, the running back takes the ball and fumbles into the end zone, and Notre Dame ends up losing that game because they can't quite get the momentum back, and that ultimately changes their season. I think back to when on Bryce Young's very first drive of his NFL career, where Frank Reich draws up this beautiful game plan, his first 10 plays or so. He's throwing the ball, and I remember, and we were going to write a story. Hey, this is what here's Bryce Young's first touchdown pass. I was going to write a quick separate to get it up online immediately, and Scott Fowler and I were in the Atlanta press box, and Scott, like 5 plays into the drive, Scott goes, "Hey, you might have to write that story soon." And then that play ended up coming down to a 4th and 1 where Frank went for it at like the 20-yard line, and the Panthers didn't get it. And that kind of changed the complexion of the game. So I think it's similar to how a basketball coach at the end of a game, if you're up 3, are you going to foul? Are you going to not? It's all about as long as you do it consistently, as long as you have a set of principles of every single time I'm going to act like this, then I think it's going to kind of all work in your favor. But and so applying that principle to Alex, who doesn't have to make any calls and who can just sit back and say I was right or I was wrong, I'm team reward your offense every time, and because you also reward your defense as well. But your analytical points make a lot of sense too. I was also a little skeeved out because I think on that second down, Robert Hunt came up a little gimpy. He was holding his hip on that play deep in the red zone, in that 4-down series. I know they ended up running behind Chandler Zavala and Austin Corbett on that, so it was on the other side. But still, I was just like, just make sure to reward your team. And that's kind of how I always looked at it. But at the same time, the Bengals then get a couple first downs, but have to punt because they have to go so far down the field. And the Panthers end up it ends up going okay for them. So, I mean, I don't know. I understand why that's such a big talking point after the game, but I was just kind of curious. I asked Dave about it after the game because I was just curious into his mindset, and I was curious into like how he approaches it. And I feel like if he was presented the same thing again, he'd go for it again. And I think that's
well, here's how I know he would, because they called the fake punt throw.
Yep.
I think when you're a team that is rebuilding and the expectations don't exist and all that stuff, it pays to be aggressive, especially when you're playing a mediocre opponent. The Bengals came in here winless. The Panthers had momentum from the week prior. Here's the thing. Here's how you're rewarding your team by going for it. Even if you don't get it, you're setting the defense up for success. And that drive did set the defense up for success.
Yep.
The Bengals wouldn't punt again for a while because they were overmatched throughout most of the game. I think, listen, I have no problem going for it on 4th and 1, as I've just stated. My issue was the play calling. Which was actually a rare blip for Canales, because I actually think that he and Brad Idzik designed a very good call sheet for this game. They were using mesh concepts, rub routes, like getting guys open, manufacturing open guys. There was one play, one of Andy Dalton's like one few misses where there was kind of there was a fake run where Miles Sanders was able to manufacture getting open in the flat, and Dalton just missed him by probably a couple of feet, but that play would have gone for 10 or so yards. I believe it was 3rd down. I'm trying to remember what the exact play was in my brain.
Yeah, I vaguely remember it. Yeah.
But I thought they did a lot of good in getting guys open. I thought it was a watchable game, right? Like, we were in there. It was competitive. Oh, yeah. The Bengals and the Panthers were competitive. And I think that's something that was missed last year. Whenever they were competitive, it was an extremely low scoring game. Yeah. There was very little pomp and circumstance. And listen, I mean, the Panthers are trying to get the will back of the fan base. I made the joke that there was so much orange and black in the stands on Sunday that it reminded me of a former Circuit City that was taken over by Spirit Halloween. You know what I mean? Like every time you see a place that's gone out of business, 2 months later, it's a Spirit Halloween. It could be the middle of June, but they seem to take over.
Wow, your joke was a little deeper than I gave it credit for. Then
Yeah, there you go, man.
it was lost on me. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
You're probably used to it at this point. Let me
but
just be clear. Like, Mike fires so many jokes in the press box. Like, obviously he's paying attention to the game and stuff, but he has just like so many like quips that are in him. I can only imagine how many quips he holds on to, because
not a lot.
He's got them coming out of his ears.
Well,
it does make the game quite compelling, even when the product isn't as compelling as it was last year.
Well, speaking of Spirit Halloween and things that are spooky, let's talk about the defense, okay? Because there were some clear breakdowns from a tackling standpoint. This team is not good at tackling. They are not. It's been proven. You can say.
What makes you say that, man?
Well, I think when Jamar Chase bounces off of 3 veteran defenders on his way to a 63-yard touchdown, it's proof positive, right?
Like he's a pinball. That was, I mean, when I saw that play, initially I was like, wow, Jamar Chase is a wonder. And then you watch the replay and you're like, wait, what's going on?
I mean, it was like Sonic the Hedgehog, but when they slow it down so that you can see every movement that he made. You know what I mean? Like it was like
yes.
everybody else was.
Yes.
So,
wow, that's one of the rare references that I do get. Wow, that's great.
Yes. Well, proof positive, right? I think, like, from my standpoint, Evero has had a good scheme. I think I've been critical of the defense and not necessarily Evero. I think he's doing what he can with what he's got. I mean, we said back in the summer, this defense was 1 or 2 injuries away from yikaroos, right? Like, and they lost their best player after week 1, Derek Brown, who
arguably lost their second best player in Shaq Thompson. We'll get to that, but arguably lost their second best player in Shaq Thompson. Don't have Dane Jackson on the outside to help out J.C. Horn, which Mike Jackson has been a nice fill-in. But yeah, this defense is bruised.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like most, if not all, of their injuries outside of Ian Thomas have been on the defensive side of the ball. We also know that, Brian Burns isn't here anymore. Not that he's lighting up the world, and neither is Frankie Louvu in Washington, but those were integral parts of last year's team. Jadeveon Clowney's kind of had an up and down 4 weeks. He's been terrific against the run. One of the few guys that has played well against the run, but then, his pass rush has kind of been inconsistent. DJ Johnson's still kind of figuring it out. They've had like a turnstile of fill-in pass rushers, whether it's Charles Harris or Teron Jackson or Thomas Incoom, who played last week or on Sunday. Their defensive line, I wrote, their entire defensive front is basically a who's who of whom? You know what I mean? Like, who are these people? So, like, LeBron Ray and Nick Thurman were 2 guys that they really liked last summer, and they played backup roles last year. Ashawn Robinson's the one guy that they brought in and they thought could stabilize the run opposite Derek Brown. Shai Tuttle's been injured. I mean, now you have Josie Jewell. Shaq Thompson's going to be out for the year. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But, like, man, injury luck has not been in favor of the Panthers defense, and like the lack of talent is showing. I don't fault Evero as much, but I also think like they brought in a bunch of guys who are familiar with this system, and a lot of those guys are still around and they seemingly have struggled as well. Mm-hmm. So that is kind of a red flag. But I think when you lose your starting free safety in Jordan Fuller, you lose your starting nose tackle in Shai Tuttle, your starting defensive end in Derek Brown, your top 2 inside linebackers in Josie Jewell and Shaq Thompson, DJ Wadham, who you expected to be your number 2 pass rusher, Dane Jackson, who you expected to be your number 2 corner. I mean, that's a lot. Like, I feel like I just added a minute to this segment by just naming those guys. So,
right, yeah.
While I think the offense has looked competent, especially with Andy Dalton under center, I just think defensively, I don't know where the help comes from. They are set to get Dane Jackson back soon. Jaden Crumedy could help, the rookie 6th-round pick, who's kind of like a project. I've mentioned Ian Thomas before. He could come back for the offense, where the running game has been tremendous. I just Alex, I just don't know how you solve the defense right now.
Yeah, I don't. don't really have an answer. I mean, and if we go to defensive leaders on the team, they're going to provide very simple answers like tackling.
Right.
We need to tackle. They're going to provide. I mean, it's not going to be necessarily a scheme thing. I mean, uh, because I think, as you said, the scheme is sound. It's about making plays. It's about, as Clowney says, on a run play, whooping somebody's ass on the other side of the ball. I mean, I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's interesting. Joe Burrow didn't get pressured all that much. Didn't suffer a sack. The one time he did get pressure, though, from Clowney, he threw an interception. So um, I'm pretty sure that was his only quarterback pressure or quarterback hit on the day. And it led to a Xavier Woods interception. So, I mean, and also you can also tell that defensive players are swiping at the ball, are really making attacks on the ball this year. I mean, there were a couple times when a play was called, or at least there's one that is sticking in me, where a player was called for forward progress, but it didn't really look like it in real time. In slow motion it did, and JC Horn was still swiping at the ball and eventually jarred it out. So I think the coaching is sound. I think it is a matter of getting your playmakers back and getting someone to the ground and wrapping them up, and not just shouldering them and hoping that they kind of knock over. I mean, that's where it comes down to. Is there something on offense? So we talked a little bit about what went right on the offensive side of the ball, and then we debated that 4th and 1 call. Is there something that went right on offense that you were like, okay, this is really encouraging?
Yeah, I mean, I think the running game, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Chuba Hubbard back-to-back 100-yard rushing games. I think I had a stat on Twitter through the last 2 games with Andy Dalton under center. He's rushed for 218 yards, caught 77 receiving yards, and his 2 total touchdowns. Like, Chuba Hubbard's a guy that I've been banging the drum all summer, and I think he is really earning himself some money through this first month of the season. He obviously needs to stay healthy. The offensive line has helped, but he's been really incredible running behind Robert Hunt. I mean, I know Zavala was in there this past game, and I actually thought Zavala played relatively well outside of that 4th and 1 play. So yeah, I mean, I think you've got to hunker down. You've got to lean on the running game, and I think that's something that Canales really wants to do. Canales really didn't have a running game last year in Tampa Bay, so I think it helps that Chuba Hubbard's so well adjusted. I thought Miles Sanders flashed quite a bit as well. He's starting to get going. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks, we're kind of waiting on that one, but
hey, 21 personnel.
Yeah, that was something that I always favor doing things that other people aren't willing to do, especially when it involves pre-snap disguise. Their ability to use Miles as the F player and move him around and make you look. I've told this story before. I was at his pro day at Penn State where he basically was forced to line up as the slot receiver for Trace McSorley because Penn State didn't have enough guys who were qualified to be at the pro day. And him as a slot receiver basically got him drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. The stuff he was able to do as a pass catcher. And I think now that Chuba Hubbard and him have both shown that they have improved hands, I think moving those guys around, especially Miles Sanders because he's so shifty, it helps you with pre-snap looks. It also allows you to use 11 personnel concepts in 12 personnel looks. So what I mean by that is, in 21 personnel looks. So which they've done with 12 personnel looks as well. So what I mean by that is if Miles Sanders is lined up in the slot, you could look at him as either running a slot receiver's route, or he can move back in motion, and then you have 2 guys in the backfield. So you're trying to get mismatches. If a team is using their nickel personnel and you've got 2 running backs, maybe it's more advantageous to run there. If they're putting out their, their base package, which technically the nickels become the base, but if they're putting out, a 7-man front and you've got the opportunity to kind of smash into them, well, maybe you get a mismatch in coverage and Miles Sanders goes out and runs a route or becomes a decoy or becomes the hot route. So I think that's kind of interesting what they're trying to do. Not to get too inside baseball or inside football or whatever there, but I think that's really interesting. But obviously, the big news coming out of this game is that they're losing Shaq Thompson basically
Yeah.
for the season. He tore his Achilles. Josie Jewell is also dealing with a groin and hamstring injury. That's a double whammy of soft tissue injuries. I know that the fan base is going to be up in arms about the turf grass debate. I mean, we don't know that. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way to quantify.
Well, part of the reason why the fuel has been tossed on the fire was because it was a non-contact injury with Shaq.
Sure.
It was also a non-contact injury for Deontay Johnson, who appeared to re-aggravate a groin injury that made him show up on the injury report earlier in the week in practice. And he had it was just like, it was one of those things where Xavier Legette dropped the ball and everyone was like, the drive won't be sustained. And then you look down on the field and it's like, oh, Deontay Johnson's also on the ground.
Yeah, he was like one of those, like when you go on vacation, you go to a pool and there's like those water torpedoes, like where they just like sink like that. That's like, it was scary.
It truly was.
And then he's back in the game like 3 or 4 plays later.
Right. Me and you, obviously, we were just like, okay, like, do we write Deontay? And because it looked that bad, and you're just like, yeah, go. And I started doing it, and then he's like grimacing on the sideline, can barely walk, can barely do anything. He's like trying to stretch, and then he like goes in the game a couple plays later, and I'm just like, wait.
Didn't
what?
he score the touchdown after that?
He scored a touchdown, and I was like, what's going on? I mean, it does remind me of a practice before the season where Deontay goes down and he's limping off the field, and all the beat writers put out on Twitter, Deontay Johnson's hurt. And then he re-enters the game and he re-enters the practice and he looks completely fine. And we all have to update our Twitter followers there. And so that's funny. I mean, maybe that's what maybe that's what he does. He he can play through pain real easily. I don't know.
Well, I mean, look at Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt, he was getting worked out. He was on the ground during Friday's practice, and then magically he plays literally the entire game against the Bengals a couple of days later. But anyway, let's talk about Shaq.
Right.
Because
let's talk about him.
Turf aside, the reality of the situation is they're going to be down at least one inside linebacker, probably 2 for the foreseeable future. And what that means is rookie 3rd-round pick Trevin Wallace, who I've been pushing to get playing time for a while. He's played on defense in his own sub package the past 2 weeks. And Claude and Chirilis, a special teams ace, are probably going to get the bulk of the snaps. They have Chandler Wooden on the practice squad. It would not shock me if they went out and brought in another inside linebacker from another practice squad. I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I think this defense is between 2 doors, right? Like a youth movement and trying to get the most out of everyone while you still got them. And if the defense continues to play this way, I don't know if he'll be guaranteed that head coaching job this year. And so what I would say is, how much do you think this impacts the defense? Because Shaq Thompson was playing exceptionally well and was one of the few sure tacklers on the team, in my opinion, along with Josie Jewell, through this first month of the season.
Yeah. And I don't exactly know what you do. What we do know is Trevin Wallace will probably be calling the plays. He'll be the one calling the plays. So a rookie will be out there leading this defense. And I mean, I will say, and perhaps this is a function of time and place in the game, of circumstances, of whatever. I didn't see a huge drop off in defensive performance once both of the inside linebackers were gone, and perhaps that was a function of my naked eye just watching the game, and the Bengals were able to move on the Panthers pretty good all game with a lot of consistency. So who knows? Maybe the Panthers are in a good spot in that inside linebacker position, and not to say that Shaq and Josie weren't super valuable, but their backups can come in and play pretty well. But the thing that I feel when I hear this Shaq Thompson news is he is 30 years old. He is preseason was already getting questions about retirement. He has already dismissed those notions of retirement on his Instagram story. He knows he's going to be back. He actually said in the preseason that he was going to try to squeeze out 5 more years. But yeah, it's more of like a heartbreaking thing because you saw it last year. You were in that despondent locker room when he went down in New Orleans, when he was carted off the field. You saw how his teammates responded and how devastated they were for him. And just from a human emotional side and seeing someone in the twilight of their career go down like that, it's heartbreaking in that sense. I don't exactly know how it's going to impact this defense because we haven't seen it fully yet with a clean slate, a clean score sheet. But I guess that's something we'll see this week in Chicago.
Yeah, I think Trevin Wallace will be better equipped in coverage than his two predecessors, but they've had trouble stopping the run. You've got to hope that he can seek and destroy as a linebacker, and that was something they liked about him, that he had kind of like untamed instincts, and I think that that's kind of interesting. I also think, Shaq's on the final year of his deal, and so you need to see what Trevin Wallace is, and I think this will give them an ample opportunity to do so. But you brought up Chicago. Let's kind of get into it. We bring up the run defense and the passing defense. And frankly, this is just what the doctor ordered. I know they're going to be on the road, but you look at how they stack up. So the Bears are averaging 253 yards per game offensively. That's 30th in the league. They are averaging 87.3 yards per game on the ground. That's 29th. They're averaging 165.8 passing yards a game. That's 26th in the league. That's even with number one overall pick Caleb Williams in there, the guy that they basically acquired because they made the trade with the Panthers the previous year for Bryce Young.
The Bears and the Panthers are just so inextricably and tragically linked going into this game.
Yes. But, DJ Moore is clearly making a difference with this rookie quarterback. So I think, look, I mean, I say that sarcastically. I feel for DJ Moore. It feels like he is destined to play with poor throwing quarterbacks throughout the bulk of his prime. Now, Caleb Williams is a good player. I still don't think he's going to be considered a bust when this is all said and done. I think this is just kind of a bumpy road. Their offensive line's not that good. But the reality of the situation right now is they're averaging just 19.3 points a game. Mm-hmm. I think having Andy Dalton in there gives them an edge. Andy, obviously a former Chicago Bear. He was there with Justin Fields, started some games, won some games. This is kind of the second leg of the second stop on his tour of former teams. If he plays the rest of the season, he'll play all four of his former teams, including the Cowboys and the Saints. Where the Bears are good is on defense. They have a top 10 unit in total yards. They're only allowing 121 rushing yards. They're only allowing 174.5 passing yards. Both of those rank in the top 20. I think
they're great on third down.
Yeah, they are terrific on third down. Opponents are only getting about 29.4% of their third down conversions. Look, these are numbers and everything, right? But in reality, this team is going to have to stick to the bread and butter. They're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to test cornerbacks. They're going to have to do some of that stuff. But I think having Chuba Hubbard to be the choo-choo train to this offense is really important. And I think
the Chuba train.
Yeah, I was going to try it, but I felt like it was going to come out wrong. And you know what I mean?
You toss me the ball. So you toss me the ball. Right. Okay.
So Alex, when you see that a team is horrible offensively, you're definitely going to go for it on 4th and 1 from the goal line, aren't you?
No, because I have my own principles. I got to stick to them. But
consistency is key.
Yes, no, consistency is important. But I mean, when I look at this game, you succinctly and beautifully set it up. I do think this is a game in which the Panthers should look at it and have their eyes wide open. The Bears' special teams has been making plays all year. The defense has really kind of kept them competitive in most of these games. So and the Bears got a win this past week. So they're feeling good. But with this new Panthers team, with this new belief behind Andy Dalton, behind a play caller that has proven that, hey, if you follow these run schemes and you stick to your holes, you're going to have like a couple big runs. When you like with this new team, with this new belief, I think the Panthers offense is set to flourish this weekend. But when it comes to the defense, and then when it comes to the defense, you just got to kind of pray that lightning doesn't strike in Chicago. And I think the Panthers are set up to win. I haven't quite done my magical work, which I will not share. I haven't quite done my magical work to figure out like where my prediction is going to be, like, and what my point spread is going to be or whatever. But I'm really high on the Panthers this week. I'll just say that. So.
Well, I might just copy whatever you do because that seems to be working for you.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think it's a toss-up. I do think, like you said, the energy is there. I think this Panthers team has a chance to win games with Andy Dalton. Hopefully Damian Lewis is back from his shoulder injury. Hopefully they're able to get Dane Jackson back in the lineup so they have a little bit more versatility at corner. Troy Hill is coming off a pretty brutal game against the Bengals. Maybe they use Dane Jackson a little bit more in the slot. Mike Jackson's played well on the outside. I'm intrigued to see how they handle that depth chart. And then I think, like, pass rush wise, Charles Harris was brought in to kind of help there. We'll see what he can do. I don't think the Bears' offensive line is particularly good. If they can get pressure early, maybe that helps. But you got to create turnovers. This is a big game for J.C. Horn. He's going to go up against DJ Moore probably most of the game. Mm-hmm. I think they're well equipped there. But I do think it's a toss-up, and I don't feel good about either way. And so with that said, Alex, let's wrap this up.
Okay, well, you got to love it when your partner tosses it to you when he says, I don't feel good about it either way. Alex, you ready to wrap it up? Well, anyway, thanks as always for listening to our pontificate. Okay, let me start that over. Thanks as always for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach, who by my count only got one shout out this podcast. We are either doing better or worse, depending on how you view that. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching the name Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
Zach, that's a wrap.